Hey everyone, welcome back. And last week I was at my first official psychology academic conference presenting my first poster as original research, and that was exciting. And I might do a video on that in the future, but that's where I was last week. But today I want to talk about some of the things that I was thinking about while I was at that conference and some of the ideas I had talking to other people in the field of psychology, and specifically the idea of locus of control. Because locus of control is a very popular theory in psychology, but I think it can be extended upon. I think that there might be more to it. And I want to present today a theoretical expansion of the locus of control theory that might be useful for conceptualizing how we feel like we either take control over our own lives or how we interact with things in our life that we don't feel like we have control over. Let's get into it. Let me start by saying that what I'm going to be talking about today isn't necessarily based on any form of research. This is more so just kind of a thought I had and a discussion I wanted to start based on my experiences working with people and just thoughts I've had in general. I've worked with more than 200 people in coaching and assessments now, and I've seen a lot of common reoccurring themes and patterns when it comes to how people interact with their environment, what they feel like they can control, and what they feel like they can't control. So I want to talk about the locus of control theory in relation to the thoughts that I've had and how I think that this theory could be expanded. But before we talk about any form of expansion, we kind of need to understand the general theory. So what is locus of control theory? Well, the general idea is that there's going to be two ends of a spectrum relating to how much control an individual feels like they have over their own life. So people who have an external locus of control generally believe that they don't have much control over their own life, and that external factors are the things that primarily influence how their day-to-day life is. They don't feel like they have much control over things. Someone who's very far on the side of the spectrum of external locus of control is likely to blame others for their own personal failures. They're not likely to see their own mistakes when they do make them. They're more likely to blame external sources like government for being the primary reason that their life isn't the way that it should be, and these sorts of things. And sometimes these thoughts are relatively justified, but there's still going to be a difference in how people perceive these things that are justified or aren't justified based on where their locus of control lies. Now, on the other side of the spectrum, we have the internal locus of control, and people who have that generally believe that they have a large amount of control over their own lives. They kind of are the ones who guide their own fate or destiny, and they are more likely to take self-blame or responsibility when mistakes are made. They're more likely to be the ones who are going to blame themselves if something goes wrong, or they're going to try to adapt themselves to achieve whatever it is that they're trying to achieve. Now, there are healthy and unhealthy versions of both sides of these spectrums. An external locus of control can be something that isn't always unhealthy, or it could be healthy in some circumstances, like you want to, for example, make a positive change in the external environment. Whereas an internal locus of control can sometimes be negative because if you put on too much self blame or you take on too much self responsibility, you can sometimes be ignoring things that may generally need to be changed outside of your own life for positive things to happen. But today I want to talk about how we can talk a little bit more about that and the expansion of the theory and how we can add a new layer that might better explain how people view themselves in relation to their environment. So conceptually, the addition that I'm proposing is actually quite simple. I think that we could add a positive and negative aspects to each side of the locus of control theory to create four total interaction styles or four total locus of control styles. So this would be positive external, negative external, positive internal, and negative internal. And the positive and negative simply are how we feel in relation to the external or internal locus of control that we have. What about these things do we feel positively and negatively about, or are we feeling positive and negative about the relationship we have with the external or internal world and our relationship to our fate in relationship to these things? So let me give an example of the differences that you might see between positive external and negative external, for example. So when we think of the external locus of control right now, my general idea is I think that right now, generally, it's negative external. When we talk about locus of control, we think of external locus of control as being negative in that someone usually shifts blame onto the outer world, and they're going to feel like their life is largely influenced by the outer world and that they can't really do a lot of things because of the factors in the external world that are preventing them from achieving whatever it is that they want to achieve. But I actually have seen another group of people in practice that are positive external. And I think that the difference between negative external and positive external is that people who have positive external generally believe that yes, there are factors outside of their own control that are influencing their lives that they can't really do much about, but then they're the most likely types of people to want to change these external factors so that they will positively influence them and other people to create a better environment for everyone that is involved. So, for example, someone who has a positive external locus of control might say that the government is not treating me fairly, or I'm not being treated fairly by this specific corporation, this sort of thing. What can I do as an individual to change that external factor so it more positively influences me and the people around me in my community? And this is going to differ from internal locuses of control, because the internal locuses of control aren't generally thinking about how their actions or the world around them are impacting the kind of group that they're in, as opposed to themselves just as individuals. Now, talking about internal locus of control, I generally think that we're on the opposite side of the spectrum when we typically discuss internal locus of control, and that we generally think of it as positive right off of the bat. So someone who has an internal locus of control in the original theory would generally be someone who takes self-responsibility, these sorts of things. They're not going to let external factors influence how they perceive themselves or stop them in relation to their goals. But I actually think that this is incorrect, and that there is a negative aspect of internal locus of control that can be just as powerful. So what is the difference between a positive internal locus of control and a negative internal locus of control? Well, the positive internal locus of control is the person who takes on self-responsibility, and failures, these sorts of things, only reinforce the fact that they should be a better version of themselves, or that they want to be a better version of themselves. So they kind of double down on their effort and apply more and try to find ways within their own power to overcome their goals. Now, the negative internal locus of control is somebody who doesn't believe that external factors are stopping them from achieving their own goals, desires. It's someone who believes that they themselves are stopping themselves from achieving their own goals, or that they aren't worthy of achieving those things. So someone with a negative internal locus of control is going to be someone with very low self-confidence. So if something happens to them, even if it's externally controlled, they might blame themselves. Oh, it's my fault for messing up there. Oh, I didn't do the right thing. Or it's my fault. I'm sorry. I did this and that. And they're not going to make the steps necessary to grow from that mistake, and instead fall into kind of a self-pity state where they blame themselves for not being good enough to do whatever it is that they want to do, but they don't have the self-confidence to then make positive change from that. So I think that's the kind of difference in the spectrum, is that there's going to be a positive external and a negative internal, and that the original theory kind of largely was ignoring these two facets, and that they're very important if we want to understand people's motivations. Because I do think that positive external is very good and helpful for society. When you look at people like Martin Luther King Jr., I think you get a good example of someone who had a positive external locus of control, and that he strongly believed that, the government, society, things were not fair to the individual, but how can that be changed to better reflect what it is that it should be? How can it better influence society as a whole? Whereas you can also see the negative internal, where there's a lot of people who have, they don't blame external factors, but they do blame themselves, but they do it in a way that's not productive, that's not positive, that doesn't lead to them developing into a better version of themselves, and instead is a negative feedback loop that tells them that, oh, I just can't do it because I'm not good enough. Oh, I can't do it because don't have the skill set, these sorts of things. And I think by adding these two to the locus of control theory, we can see a better representation of people as a whole and how they might be interacting with their environment. The reason I conceptualize it this way, and I think it's important to maybe conceptualize it this way, is because traditionally when we think of locus of control theory, when we want to get healthier, we move from external to internal. We take control over our lives. But I do think that there actually is a place for external locuses of control, and I think that a positive external locus of control is exceedingly rare, but also something that's important in society. And that instead of moving from external to internal to develop into a healthy individual, we could instead attempt to move from negative versions of locus of control to positive versions of locus of control, even if it goes across the board. What do I mean by that? So I think that it's possible for a person with a negative external locus of control to go to a positive internal, or a person with a negative internal to go to a positive external. And the general theory here is that things in your life are going to influence your locus of control, and they can change throughout the lifespan. You can go from positive to negative as well if something happens to you. For example, if you're someone who believes you have a lot of control of your own life, but maybe you get in a bad car accident that wasn't your fault, maybe you'll start to fear taking action because the outside environment now is impacting you and you don't have control over these things. Or maybe you're someone who achieved something after a long time of not achieving something, and that sparks that self-confidence in you, and now suddenly you believe that you have control of your own life and you move to a positive internal locus of control. The general idea here is that I think that there's positive versions of both of these, and both of these are going to be healthy and needed in society. I think Martin Luther King Jr. is a great example of someone who is a positive external locus of control, and that he generally believed that, the government, society, and things weren't as good as they could be and were negatively impacting him and everyone around him, and that changes could be made within that, even if it was at the expense of his individuality or things of that nature. And maybe he wasn't so much concerned with him himself. Positive internal locuses of control, these people, I actually identify this myself on this part of the spectrum myself, tend to be the most successful and self-confident when it comes to things, but they also tend to be the most selfish from my experience. They tend to be the people who are focused on their goals, their passions, their pursuits. And these things are important for certain people, and I think certain people need to live like this, or else they're going to feel like they're drained or unable to live productively. But if you're focused on your individual pursuits and goals, a lot of the times you're going to be ignorant of the societal things that need to be done as well. And I don't think that everybody in the world can be someone who is a positive internal and things to be healthy. I also don't think that it's possible for everyone to be a positive external for everything to be healthy. I think that there has to be a balance, because people who are in the various aspects and various, quadrants here are going to achieve different types of things in life, and all of those are going to be necessary for different reasons. So the general theory that I'm proposing here is that there's a positive and negative version of each side of the locus of control current theory, and that instead of thinking that people need to move from external to internal to become healthy, instead we should try and move people from negative versions of their locus of control to positive versions of their locus of control, to make it feel like they can have a positive impact on the things that are influencing their life, whether they think those things are external or internal.